Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new episode of Political Economy of Forbes 15. My name is Nicholas Hintermeyer. I'm a journalist of the German-speaking issue of Forbes, and I'm very pleased to welcome my guest today. It's Sir Michael Leigh. He's the former Director General for Enlargement for the European Commission, and he's now Academic Director of the Master of Arts in European Public Affairs at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Bologna, moreover a senior fellow at Bruegel in Brussels. So thank you, Michael Leigh, for your time and for your willingness for the interview.
It's a pleasure. Good morning, Nicholas.
Good morning. I would like to start with enlargement and neighbor policies of the European Union, because the European Council has recently agreed to open the accession talks with North Macedonia and Albania. And as a first question, I would like to ask you, how important is it on the one hand for the European Union, but also for the two official candidate countries to open these negotiation talks right now?
The process of becoming a member of the European Union is a very long one. And it's important to give encouragement to countries like North Macedonia and Albania, even if their membership is many years away. They still need to see progress. They need to feel that they are advancing towards eventual membership. And given the moves that Northern Macedonia has made in changing its name, the new elections that have been held, which have brought back to power a pro-European political party, and the reforms underway in Albania, I think the credibility of the European Union requires it also to be ready to take the next step.
It's also very interesting because the European Commission presented to the Council the draft negotiation framework, laying out the guidelines and the principles of this further accession talks. And what I found very interesting is that this draft negotiation framework built on the experiences of past enlargements. So my first question would be, on what experiences you could think of can the European Commission build upon? And maybe as a second question, more personal question, how could they fundamentally differ to those negotiations that you led in your time as the Director General for Enlargement of the European Commission?
Well, there are plenty of precedents. In what we now call the Western Balkans, Croatia became a member in 2013, having begun the negotiations in 2005. And earlier on, Slovenia, which was previously considered to be part of the Western Balkans and then somehow migrated to Central and Eastern Europe, also became a member, but way back in 2004. And probably the main lesson that has been learned over the years is that you cannot leave to the end of membership talks fundamental questions about democracy, human rights, the rule of law. That countries need to prove the commitment, and not only their commitment, their track record in these areas at the point when they begin the negotiations. These have to come up front. And that's the kind of reform that has gradually been introduced over the years, and that one would wish to see in this particular case also followed. In personal terms, what I experienced was that the main negotiation really takes place on your own side more than with the opposite number the country you're negotiating with. In other words, when I was negotiator on behalf of the EU, I had to be in constant touch with our own member states. And keeping our own member states on board was a major part of my challenge. And that will certainly be the case in the future, given the enlargement fatigue, given the fact that public opinion in the member states is not really prepared for a new round of enlargement in the midst of the COVID crisis and just getting over previous crises related to migration, and with a bad press being given to Hungary and Poland in terms of rule of law, preparing our own public opinion and explaining to public opinion in the member states why it is in the interest of the European Union to continue this process. However skeptical the public might be, these, I think, are among the main challenges.
When you mention like these challenges with the enlargement fatigue, so to say, and also like to shapen the opinion of the public, but also towards the old European members, the Union member states, so to say, how realistic is it, like in a further month and years, for North Macedonia and Albania that they really become European Union member states, as for now, so to say, also in the midst of the coronavirus crisis?
Look, the previous Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker, when he became Commission President, said that there were going to be no new members joining on his watch, and that concluded last year. Now we are embarked on further talks, and a realistic view would be that it's hard to imagine new countries joining the European Union until very late in the present decade. There's so much work that they have to do on their side, and there's so much the EU has to do to tackle its various challenges, which we're reading about every single day, that to be realistic, this is still many years away. And so the real challenge is to provide continuous benefits, continuous incentives to those countries so that they feel an interest in continuing their political and economic reforms, and trying to get the member states to support this policy, both for geopolitical reasons and economic and strategic reasons. And this is a constant challenge for those in charge of this area of policy in Brussels.
When you mention like strategic strategies, how important was it, like as a whole, for the European Union to send out a strong commitment or a strong signal towards the Western Balkans that the European Union is, like in general, open to, like to put it simple, to new European member states? Because, for example, if we look to Serbia in general isn't very in favor of the European Union at the moment with the President Vučić, and also because, for example, he's shown his affection more towards China, for example. So when we look to the Western Balkans as a whole, how important was it from the European Union to send a signal, at least, towards these countries?
It was important, and it remains important, and it will remain important. I mean, geography alone explains that. When you look at the map, you see that this region is entirely surrounded by EU member states. We are the principal traders and investors and the principal providers of assistance to these countries. And of course, today, outside powers are taking an increasing interest in the region, whether China, more in terms of investments, Russia, in terms of making life more difficult for the West, and trying, not very successfully, I must say, to develop its own sort of soft power, kind of ethno-nationalist, religious-based soft power, to which the countries are not very responsive in practice. And other countries like Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Iran have interests in this region too. And as it is so close to us, and as we promised already 20 years ago that these countries would one day become EU members, I think it's really important for us to make good on this commitment. And for example, during the COVID-19 crisis, the beginning of the crisis, at first, the EU was rather slow to get started with assistance. And the Chinese and the Russians jumped in, sent planes with emergency supplies, with much drama and much media coverage. Later on, as in our own member states, in Italy, for example, it became apparent that the EU was overwhelmingly the main source of assistance. And at a summit with the Western Balkans countries a couple of months ago, rather unusually, in the conclusions, the EU underlined that it is the major source of assistance to these countries. And you mentioned President Vucic, and after flirting with the Russians and the Chinese and putting up posters all over Belgrade welcoming their assistance, following the virtual summit, he did confirm that after all, Serbia is a country that looks principally to the West and that recognizes the important role that the EU is playing. So it's a complex picture. I think the people in the Western Balkans, they know perfectly well that the European model is far more attractive for them than the Russian or the Chinese, let alone the other countries that I've mentioned. But from time to time, their leaders like to play geopolitical games.
Let's move to Poland, because the presidential elections had taken place there, and Duda won the elections second time in a row, so to say, with the also nationalist, Eurosceptic, also anti-German campaign to some extent, and he's gonna be present until 2025, even though the opposition doesn't really recognize this result, so to say. Like, on the other hand, also like the party Law and Justice, this National Conservative Party, remain in government, which has influenced the public media, the judiciary, and also state-owned companies to a huge extent. Also, Article 7 procedure of the European Union was triggered against Poland because of some very controversial laws. My question would be, when we look at the funding out of this next generation EU package, this recovery plan from the European Commission, some northern countries said that they're quite reluctant to say, okay, Poland gets a great amount of funding because of these controversial laws and the controversial situation in Poland. And for example, that they want a preconditionality on rule of law. And also Charles Michel, the president of the European Council, said that Poland should commit to the carbon neutrality goals of the European Union as a precondition in regard to these funds. What do you think, how should the European Union act towards Poland in regard of the current situation there?
The rule of law situation in both Hungary and Poland has been a major source of concern for years now. The problem is that the existing provisions of the EU treaties do not really have teeth. There are no really strong measures that the EU can take if a country, once it has become a member, slides back to a more authoritarian form of government. And until now, the assumption has been that the area where the EU could have most influence would be finance. And in academic circles, in think tanks, in policy circles for years now, the assumption has been that under the new 7-year EU budget that is being debated as we speak this morning among the member states, there would be rule of law conditionality attached to the very generous support provided to these countries by the EU, support that has reached 3 or 4% of GDP at times since they became members. The difficulty, of course, is to get all member states, including the interested ones, to agree to such a measure, or to find a decision-making rule, qualified majority, that would permit such decisions to be taken, even though they themselves object. And the difficulty that we're running into now with the recovery plan from COVID-19 is that countries, for example, in Southern Europe, are so anxious to get the recovery funds soon, for obvious reasons. Their economies are suffering terribly with this very deep recession that has followed the epidemic, that they are subject to pressure from Hungary and Poland not to agree to the rule of law conditionality. And there's a real possibility that this notion of attaching rule of law conditionality will be a victim, so to speak, of the epidemic in these budget talks.
When you mentioned like the next generation EU plan, this recovery plan of 750 billion euros, I found a very interesting like figure from Bruegel that said like it's about 25% of the grants of the about 430 billion euros that they just will be spent between 2020 and 2022. You were stuck. Okay, now it's again. You're again here. Sorry. Okay, sorry. That just 25% of the grants between 2020 and 2022 will be spent. So, what's your overall, to put it simple, what's your overall impression of this next generation EU recovery package? Is it enough, and is it also like a quick enough tool to really boost the economic recovery of the European Union?
It really does represent a breakthrough for the European Union, and for the Commission to borrow money on capital markets and then to allocate it to member states in grants and loans is an absolute first for the European Union. I think we have to acknowledge that, and this is as a result principally of Germany not joining the Frugal Four in opposing such a step. So this is a very significant move forward for the European Union. Now we're into negotiations of the detail, and the total amount is likely to be reduced somewhat. The balance between grants and loans may still be further adjusted. There may be changes in decision-making rules about how approval of grants is given in the future. There is ample scope for negotiation. But with France and Germany, who were at the origin of this scheme, strongly supporting it, I think whatever comes out in the negotiations will only be a relatively minor modification by comparison with the kind of compromise which is now on the table. Is it enough? Well, is it ever enough? This is a very, very deep recession, but the amounts we're talking about in grants are enough to have some macroeconomic effect. But a point that's been made recently that I think is really worth considering is that the money has been proposed essentially for national expenditure, not but expenditure at EU level. And also the way in which the money is to be allocated among member states is according to a kind of national share out that has rather encouraged a negotiation based on the principle of the juste retour, or as Mrs. Thatcher used to say, I want my money back. And this is not a very edifying type of negotiation. And I think once the member states start to look beyond the immediate crisis needs, what they should start to think about are initiatives at European level to help boost the economies, to help stimulate infrastructure, investment, the green economy, digitalization, decarbonization, better trans-European transport schemes, and so on, at the European level. That is somewhat lacking in this present package. And I think it needs to evolve from immediate crisis intervention at the national level to longer-term projects at the European level to really reinforce the process of European integration.
Very interesting. Let's move to like a last topic, like a last question would like to ask you to the transatlantic relations, because US President Donald Trump has recently agreed to the withdrawal of about 9,500 US troops that are based currently in Germany. So the total amount of US troops in Germany will be reduced to about 25,000 in Germany. And because, of course, US President Donald Trump is accusing Germany for years right now to not paying or contributing enough money to the NATO budget, for not hitting this 2% of national GDP target. Do you think, is this from US President Donald Trump, is it more strong rhetoric also with a strong practical impact, or really a starting threat to the territorial protection and from the United States towards Europe? Or what's your impression on this move, so to say, from Trump?
I think this particular move at this time has to be seen in the American political context. He is appealing to his base, and it is also intended as a kind of payoff to populists in Poland who have very much given him the impression that they would like to become his main reliable allies in Europe. And they put forward various flattering schemes that I'm sure you're aware of for the reallocation of these troops to Poland and so on. I don't think that it is strategically very significant in itself. You talk about the rhetoric, the notion that European allies need to do more to move towards the NATO 2% target for expenditure on security and defense is one that every American government, as long as we can remember, has argued for. And Trump is in a long line there, and whoever succeeds Trump is likely to take a similar line. But I think this particular move at this time should be seen mainly in an American political context.
So, Michael Leigh, thank you very much for the interview and for your time and for answering our questions. And I wish you all the best in Brussels in the summer.
Thanks very much. Same to you, Nicholas. Thanks so much for your invitation. I wish you also a pleasant and a healthy summer.
Thank you very much. Stay healthy. And to our viewers, thank you very much for watching us again. You can subscribe our YouTube channel. It's below the video itself. And please tune in to Political Economy also next Wednesday when we have an inspiring next guest. So thank you and goodbye.